In this video, we will talk about video-recorded investigative interviews, why they are important, and whether they should be used in court more extensively than today is the case. My name is Korkman. I'm a senior program officer at HEUNI and a professor of practice at Åbo Akademi University. From centuries already, we have known that memory is fallible. Over time, we forget. This is shown already in a very early study by Hermann Ebbinghaus from 1885. And this is, of course, well known to anyone working with legal processes, but it is a true and also current problem in our criminal justice system, because in many cases, parties have to wait for a very long time before they are heard in court. This means that over time they forget, so they might lose out on some of the information. It also means that the risk for memories to be distorted increases. Also, of this we have research since many, many decades, quite convincing research showing that when we discuss memories or experiences, when we get information from other sources, memories easily get distorted, and thus you will find discrepancies in what has been said initially, for example, in a police investigative interview, and what is said later in court. This may lead to judges assessing an account by a party as unreliable, while in fact it could be just normal memory processes in action. In many countries, the police do not video record or even audio record necessarily investigative interviews, but they write down a kind of summary or statement on what the person has said in the investigative interview. We know, however, from research that these summaries are not true to the original content in the sense that they would represent precisely what has been said. In fact, research points to distortions here. So some of the statements may actually be assumptions made by the police, often unknowingly. They also may reflect what the police in the interviewing situation considers the most important thing, while it may be that some other aspects that were not written down will actually become important later in the process or for assessing credibility. So this is one of the many problems with this procedure. We also know that the risk of false confessions is one of the issues that may lead to miscarriages of justice. And if there are and these false confessions may very often be related to poor interviewing or interrogation tactics. So there's quite consistent research showing that poor and pressuring investigative interviewing methods are a risk factor for false confessions. In a court case some years ago in Sweden, a young father had confessed to severely abusing his infant, and he was convicted in district court, but later freed in the appeal court. Luckily, in this case, the police had taken a video recording of the investigative interview, and court members could quite easily see that this man had in fact been highly pressured to confess, and there was no other evidence of his guilt. If these investigative interviews or interrogations are not video recorded, then of course there is no possibility of going back to the original statement and assess the case based on that. Legal psychology experts, memory experts have for a very long time already argued that all police interrogations or interviews must be video recorded. However, as said, this is not the case in many countries. It's not only suspects or that can be led to give false confessions and thus suffer from the lack of video recording, but also for crime victims this can pose quite a severe threat to their rights. There's a study showing that of rape victims who were interviewed by the police quite early on after the alleged rape, and then 2 or so years later in district court, by the time they were heard in district court, they had lost 2/3 of the story, implying that they could no longer recall many of the details they had been able to provide in the police interview. And this has led to a shift in many countries to go towards video recording investigative interviews. Not as many countries as should be there yet, but this seems to be the trend. Many recent and earlier studies have showed that mandatory electronic recording of police interviews really has both helped identifying risk factors and also has helped ensuring that the quality of police investigative interviews and interrogations improve. This is also proposed in a very recent summary statement paper by Saul Cassin and other experts, noting that they propose to mandate video recording of all suspect interviews, and also in their entirety, all of it, and from a neutral camera angle. So it's not insignificant how you actually go about these video recordings. One last note on the kind of international trends. Some years ago, the international community made an agreement on what is known as the Méndez Principles, in principles on effective interviewing for investigations and information gathering. And also, according to the Méndez Principles, audiovisual recording is a foundational procedural safeguard. It's calling for comprehensive recording. We know, as I said, that recordings discourage police misconduct, reduces false confessions, and enables assessing interview quality and also learning from interviews conducted. This is a very important part of police training. Also, not having to take these written statements while you are conducting the investigative interviews help investigators to focus on creating rapport with the interviewee and active listening, posing the right questions, making sure you actually attend to everything that is being said. So this is very important for from an investigative perspective. In the E ViVi project, we conducted a survey and also interviews where we, among other things, looked at the experience of court professionals of using video-recorded investigative interviews in court. And the picture was kind of mixed. More than half of the respondents, they were judges, prosecutors, attorneys, had very rarely or never used video-recorded investigative interviews with adult parties in court, but almost half had sometimes or regularly, and a very small percentage always have used these investigative interviews as video-recorded. When asking about perceived advantages, parties noted that memory is preserved, so it does give better evidential value, and this really is supported by large research. The participants also noted it protects vulnerable groups such as very old persons, very young persons, persons who have different kinds of illnesses, psychological, physical. For example, persons with a risk for or actual dementia. Video recording is absolutely crucial for quite obvious reasons. Also, fear and safety issues were brought forward. So sexual crime victims or intimate partner crime victims, persons who are victimized by or also testimony to organized criminality, may fear for their safety during the court proceedings. So in these cases, this may be a way of protecting them. We also know from other research on, for example, intimate partner violence, that victims may choose not to come forward later. They might tell about it in the early stage of the police investigative interview, but then retract or not want to or not dare to talk against the offender later on. So this may be the only way to actually get their initial true statement. It's also a way to avoid re-traumatization. And in our data, especially the data from Finland and Sweden, participants often noted that victims should not have to sort of pay for being a crime victim through repeated hearings, that they should be able to tell what happened and then move on with their life, not having to wait years and years and try to keep these things alive in their minds. Of course, there are also practical reasons which were raised, such as cross-border situations. We have, for example, cases of suspected human trafficking where there's a big group of persons who are suspected of being victimized in Southeastern Asia, and the proceedings are taking place in Finland many years later. There, it might really be important to collect the data, through the investigative interviews that the court proceedings need to build on. And then authenticity and legal certainty. If you have a video recording of the police investigative interview, you do not have to dispute about what was actually being said. And in fact, for police officers, this has come forward in other studies, this may be a way also to protect police officers from being from claims of having been manipulative or pressuring. In the open-ended answers, Participants brought forward that you should record early and cross-examine already at pre-trial stages, so the defendant should have some kind of way of posing their questions to the victim through an attorney or through the interviewer. And again, memories fade significantly by trial. Our participants seem to be quite aware of this. The court professionals also noted that proper interviewing technique by the police is critical. Otherwise, we cannot rely, of course, on the early interviews. And as said, the defendant must have some kind of opportunity to question the complainant or their story. They have to have an equal legal right to come forward with their version and sort of test the victims or the complainant's claims. Many noted that this early recorded interviewing may be decisive in intimate partner violence cases where, as said, complainants later may withdraw. And then here also, not to any surprise, the time gap between the offense and the trial was noted and assessed to really make early recordings very, very valuable. There were also perceived disadvantages, and by far the most frequently commented upon was the limitation of the right to cross-examine. And for instance, in Sweden, especially defense lawyers were quite critical and said that if the victims are recorded, their interviews recorded early on, and they are no longer heard in court, it's sort of really, the defendant may really lose out on the right to pose critical questions. And this is, of course, a very important right as well. So here are some of the statements they made or they wrote down. You cannot cross-examine a pre-recorded audio recording, which significantly undermines the ability to mount a defense. Overall, there was a concern of missing out on information not provided in the recorded interview. So judges, for example, were worried that the police may not have asked for everything that is actually important later on in court. And also poor interview quality. So all police officers do not have enough training to conduct qualitatively good investigative interviews. And again, this we know from other research that we have a clear lack in investigative interviewing training among police officers in many, indeed, I think, most countries in Europe. Another quote here, in cases where only fragments of certain interviews are used, the full context is lost and the judge may be left with a distorted picture. So obviously, if you pick out just part of the video recorded interview, indeed, someone has made that decision and the court may lose out on the full picture. On the other hand, other participants were noting that sometimes these investigative interviews are very, very extensive. Much of the information is perhaps not crucial to the court. So there's a balance here in how much is shown and how that decision is made. So there are obvious obstacles also to using early recorded interviews. Many participants noted that the solution is to have an early recorded interview, watch it, and then in court also pose questions to the, for instance, complainant. When we asked whether the participants, again, the judges, prosecutors, lawyers, thought that video recorded interviews will be used increasingly over the next 5 years, they were quite in agreement that they will probably increase. The problem, however, is that there is currently almost no training for legal professionals on how to work with these recorded interviews. So of the 267 judges, prosecutors, lawyers who responded to our survey, only 26, or around 10%, had received any training on the usage of video recorded interviews in court. So here is really a call for future both research and capacity building in this regard. And of course, there's still concerns about how the recording is done, what kind of view you have, poor technical quality, how, as said, how parties are questioned, how the video is edited, and not posing all the important questions at the right time. So we have much work to do in this regard, but again, I want to stress that it was quite the need or the importance of video recording investigative interviews was very much supported by how fragile memory is. If we really want to have a procedural truth that is as close as possible to the objective truth, then this is clearly the way to go. One of the, I'm going to finish with a quote by one of the participants who said that the best outcome is to have a recorded interview conducted already during the pre-trial investigation, possibly also allowing for cross-examination. Memories of events fade significantly during the long time, sometimes several years, before the case reaches the court. This is indeed indisputably the case. Thank you.